Let's get into it. Okay, we've got obviously a huge week. We got all these ranked matchups, and we're all excited for all of them, certainly. But one stands above the rest, and I think that we all agree on that. Ohio State's going to travel to South Bend and take on Notre Dame. And this game immediately, yeah, it was big before the year, but now it's become, I feel like, even bigger. And it's because of how the first 3 weeks of the season have played out. And I'm going to go back to a point that I made on Monday's show. And those of you who watched, thank you. There's been a lot of you, by the way, watched and listened. Numbers are great for the show. I really appreciate you, the college football fan, for joining us. And make sure to share it with a friend, because the more of us that are talking about the sport in a positive way, the better. Now, I said on Monday that there is a difference this year than what we have experienced over the last 8 to 10 years in college football. In the last decade or more, really, you could make an argument that you would go to number 1 or 2, maybe number 3 in the country, and then you could draw a clear line right there under number 3, sometimes 2, and say, okay, everybody above the line, you're elite. Everybody below the line, good. Clearly not in the same class as those above the line. There was a real point of demarcation between the teams that could go win a national championship and the teams that were just playing well and happened to be ranked in the top 10 and sometimes even in the top 5. I think we can all agree on that. So regardless of where teams finished in the rankings or how highly they were ranked, I think we all know that there were only a few teams over the last decade plus that were actually national championship caliber. Now this year, excited to announce for everybody, this year feels different. We went over this on Monday. If you haven't listened or watched, by the way, go back and do it, because it'll frame this whole conversation for you. Now I feel like we've got between 9 and 11 teams that I would be not surprised one bit if they wound up in the college football playoff. And I wouldn't be surprised one bit if they actually wound up as national champions. Not one bit. And I get it. Like, Georgia's still out there. Yep, I understand. But based on what we've seen so far during the course of the season, I think that we've got a lot of really good teams. I don't know if any of them are elite, above the line, clearly better than everybody else teams. This is a positive, especially when you start to look at this game, Notre Dame and Ohio State. So once you understand that about the season and how the season is going so far, then you start to look at this game in a totally different light. Now, the winner of this game all of a sudden sets themselves up to be not just in the playoff conversation, but one of the teams that we can legitimately say, yep, they can win the national championship. So let's just say for a moment, okay, and we're going to do this for both teams, okay? So Buckeye fans, don't get all upset. This is not a pick. I'm going to do this for both teams. I'm going to take both results and evaluate what that would mean for the season, for the programs, and for really all of us moving forward. Let's say Notre Dame were to win at home on Saturday. Let's just say. They've actually, if you look at the numbers, reached the top 5 at some point in 5 of the last 7 seasons. And yet, wouldn't this feel different because of the framing I just gave you a moment ago? You see, because as well as Notre Dame has played, let's be fair, I don't think any of those seasons or any of us would have put them above the line. I think that that's a fair and honest assessment. In none of those seasons did I feel like, you know what, they can beat insert above the line team here. Bama, Clemson, Georgia, even in a couple of those years like Ohio State, like in 19. I never felt that. And I think if you're being honest, you would agree, even if you're a Notre Dame fan. Now, this year is different because that line has moved. And if they are able to beat Ohio State, don't they feel like a national title contender? Yeah, they do. That's why this could be the most significant game that Notre Dame has played in at least 30 years, because it's been that long. It's been that long. Let's just take a look, meander through history here, because I know people are going to be saying, like, this is crazy. They played for a national championship in 2012 and they were in the playoffs, so on and so forth. They were never above the line. If we're honest, okay, let's pedal in honesty here. Since 1994, so that's 30 seasons, Notre Dame is 4-19 in top 10 matchups. 4-19. Here were the wins. They beat Clemson, who was number 1 in 2020. They didn't have Trevor Lawrence. That was the DJU game. They later lost to them in the ACC championship game. And let's face it, that wasn't a close contest. All right. They beat them on an emotional night at home. I never at any point said to myself, like, yep, that's an above the line team. Remember, where was the line back then in 2020? 2, 3, maybe? They weren't above that line. And if we're being honest, we would all agree with that. They beat number 7 Stanford in 2018. Weren't above the line in that year. They beat number 8 Oklahoma in 2012. Yeah, maybe this is pre-playoff. We'll get to 2012 in a moment. And they beat number 6 Texas in 1996. Okay, so what was different, though? Okay, let's go to 2012. You could be telling me all you want. Like, nope, Joel, they played for a national championship. They played against Alabama. That was an undefeated team with Manti Te'o. That was an above-the-line team. I'm here to tell you they weren't. They weren't. There were 2 teams above the line, maybe a third in 2012. I know because I remember watching the SEC championship game. I remember watching that game out of Atlanta, and Aaron Murray and Todd Gurley and Georgia are driving late against Alabama, and Alabama is a great team. These are 2 great teams. Mark Richt is the coach for Georgia, and it's like, is Georgia finally going to beat Alabama? They're driving. They finally get stopped at the 5-yard line. And what did we say about that SEC championship game? You know what? Whoever wins this, however this goes, that's the team that's going to win the national championship, because both of them were clearly better than Notre Dame. None of us gave Notre Dame a chance in that national championship. None of us. And by the way, rightly so. And that's how the championship game played out. That's how the playoff games have played out when Notre Dame has gone in there. That's how the national championship game has played out. But this year feels different. That's why, Irish fans, Saturday could be the biggest win you've had since 1994. And I don't think that that's hyperbolic to suggest. You see, pre-94, from 88 to 93, they were a powerhouse. They were competing for national championships in 88, 89, 90, 91. They're in that Orange Bowl a couple of years in a row with Colorado. They were 14-3 during those years in top 10 matchups and 1 tie. So think about that. So from 88 to 93, they're 14-3, 1 tie in top 10 matchups. Since then, they're 4-19, and even in those 4, I never would have categorized them as above the line. If they win Saturday night, they are an above-the-line team. Now, the line has moved, but that's a good thing for Irish fans. That's why this game is so important. It will legitimize them as a playoff contender, surely, and even a national championship caliber team. They finally have the requisite quarterback. They've got a good running game. I like their skill on the outside. I like what they are at the line of scrimmage, and we'll see if their defense can hold up. This would not be just a great top 10 win for Notre Dame. This would mean something very different for them. Now, if they lose, yikes. They will still not have beat Ohio State since the 30s. They would not be considered an above-the-line team at that point. They would fall down past that 11, depending on what happens in Ole Miss, Alabama, right? Like, it wouldn't be good. You would be like, well, here we go again, if I'm a Notre Dame fan. But if they win, you look at their schedule and you're like, oh, yeah. This is real. Look at their schedule. They would go at 18 Duke, which all of a sudden becomes a tough game, at Louisville. Then they're home against number 5 USC. That becomes really, really interesting. Bye week, home against Pitt, at Clemson, which all of a sudden doesn't look like what it looked to be at the preseason. Bye week, and then their last 2, home to Wake and at Stanford. If they win Saturday night, that's all of a sudden incredibly manageable outside of hosting USC. So I tell you what, this is as big of a game as I can remember for Notre Dame, because this is really for the first time in a long time. In my mind, I'm like, you know what? This is a coin flip game. They are on the level with Ohio State. And if they can win this one at home with the more veteran quarterback, watch out. Watch out for the Irish. Now, let's flip this over. What if Ohio State wins? Okay, so let's just take a look at an Ohio State win. First of all, you would be able to audibly hear an exhale out of Columbus because every single fan would be like, oh, man, it's been so stressful in these 3 weeks when we're beating everyone by only 20. We talked about this on Monday. Like, Ohio State is under the most scrutiny of any team in America in college football, even more so than even Bama, maybe. I think those two are obviously the top two. We evaluate Ohio State like we evaluate the Dallas Cowboys. And so if they can go and win on the road with a young quarterback, there will be a massive exhale. Like, okay, we're still good. We're still good. It will be one of the best wins on their resume that they've had in quite some time. And it can start to put to bed this narrative that Ryan Day only wins games against teams that he's supposed to and doesn't win the big ones. You remember back in the early 2000s, I always remember this, like Bob Stoops got the nickname Big Game Bob because they always seemed to win big games. And yeah, that waned over the years, but that kind of the moniker always stuck with him. Well, unfortunately for Ryan, he's got these incredible numbers against everybody else in the country. And then when he goes to the playoff or faces Michigan, those numbers go the opposite direction. This would go a long way. If he were able to go on the road with a young quarterback and this team and win at Notre Dame, that would go a long way in dispelling that narrative. Ryan's an excellent coach. You know, Day is easily in the top 5 in college football and coaches. That's why I think it's laughable, this narrative of like, well, he would be on the hot seat. What do you mean hot seat? Who are you going to get? Like, stop it. What are we doing? You guys all think Mike Vrabel's going to come back? Why would he come back? Why would he come back? To be under this level of scrutiny and have to go recruit in the NIL and portal age? Come on. What are we doing? What are we doing? I also believe that this would be a real feather in the cap for the team from a confidence perspective, and this would propel them through their schedule, which will be difficult. You know, they've got a bye after this game. Then they're going to be against Maryland, which I think is a good football team, at Purdue, home to Penn State, massive game, obviously. And that Penn State team is specifically constructed to match up with Ohio State. They've got to go to Wisconsin, to Wisconsin, at Rutgers, which all of a sudden is playing better, Michigan State, which looks like maybe the worst team in the Big Ten right now with everything that's going on, Minnesota, and then at Michigan. So like their schedule, even with a win, doesn't all of a sudden open up like Notre Dame's does. But certainly you look at this and you're thinking to yourself, okay, Ohio State is what Ohio State has been if they win this game. Now, if they lose, it would be a third straight big game that they would have lost. Michigan last year, Georgia last year, and then Notre Dame. It would be just Day's 4th loss in 5 seasons outside of the playoff, but it would be a big one. They could probably still make the playoff, in particular if they could run the table in the Big Ten and win the Big Ten championship, but it might be more difficult, obviously, because Notre Dame would be considered a favorite or evaluated higher than them. So it gets more interesting. It's a win means more for Notre Dame and a loss means more for Notre Dame as it relates to this season, the playoff, and a potential national championship. But in terms of narrative surrounding the program, a win or a loss means more to Ohio State. Thank you for watching the Joel Klatt Show YouTube channel. And if you liked this clip, make sure to like it and subscribe to the channel, and you can stay up to date on all of my college football coverage.